Praise the Lord, guys. I'm Shaw Greenhorn. And they said unto Elizabeth, there is none of thy kindred that is called by that name. So they made signals to his father what he would have him be named. So the father, he asked for a writing table, and he wrote, his name shall be called John, and they all marveled. Now immediately his mouth was open and his tongue loose, and he spake, giving praise to God. And fear came on all of them that dwelt round about. And the news of this issue was published throughout all the hill country of Judea. So the deliverance here by birth of John the Baptist. We just saw where Mary, she came to see Elizabeth after, both of them had received, their prophecies. Elizabeth having received it from her husband because she was never directly spoken to. We saw Mary spend some time, 3 months with Elizabeth, them exchanging, prophecies, formations, clearing the greatness of the Lord, how he is able, how he had lifted, both of them up from, their low estate. So, in this, line of scriptures, we see where previously they had wanted to name this, child after his father. No doubt him having gone his whole life, almost not having a child. All the sadness that this must have caused, all the inconveniences, all the whispers, people walking by, getting in a heated enough argument with somebody, and they might pull this up. That's why you guys have no kids. Him being delivered, from this, outcome in his life. They rejoice with him, and they reckon that he should be called Zacharias after his own father, after himself. As Zacharias Jr. But we ended off the last time where we saw Elizabeth interrupt and said, no, not so, his name shall be called John. So this is given in the prophecy that the angel Gabriel had told them, that he shall be named John. So the name is now open for discussion. If we look back on previous, women that were barren that gave birth to great prophets. In the Old Testament, a name wasn't really given. When Abraham was promised a child, the name Isaac wasn't given. Samuel, when he was promised to Hannah, the name Samuel was not one that was given. But in these two New Testament prophecies of, these miraculous births, Elizabeth, his name shall be given John. Mary, even though she's not barren, but rather immaculate conception, having, known no man, so to speak, his name was given as Jesus. So we see, really an attempt by the people here to interject what they think, things should be like, interjecting what they think it should be, even after having been given such specific instructions by, the angel, from God. This just goes to show you that not every advice is going to be good advice. Some advice will come to test, what you know to be right. It's up to you to be able to identify the difference and to act accordingly. Sometimes the crowd, it comes to pull you astray, because not only after Mary gives her answer, they even go to the father. Like, are you not going to say something about this? Why are we going in this direction? There is none of your kindred, with this name. Do you not see that this is madness? And, when I got into the last video, I spoke of how this was, intentional. And now here we see further kickback and, resistance from these, onlookers that are in the room or in the house with them. So this just, goes to show you much more so that this was not by accident. They wanted to rename this child a different name that was given by the angel. There's great resistance. It doesn't just come from nowhere. There was a spirit right here operating behind the scenes, trying to inject, as much disobedience as it could. Because, God, he can't work through disobedience. Would this child power have been weakened if they gave him another name? Would God have scrapped this project, altogether and gone with somebody else? Zechariah, still here being unable to speak. Now, we know that Elizabeth knows that the child's name should be John, even though the angel did not directly speak to her. So at some point, he must have communicated it to her, as we see here with a writing tablet, because he was unable to speak. So then he did not communicate this to the rest of the people standing around. And you can say that, well, it was none of their business anyway. But you can make an observation here with this couple, Elizabeth and Zechariah. Compare them to Adam and Eve in the garden, because both were told something as to what the Lord, his will was, what he expected to be happening in their presence. And we see an outsider, a third party, being the serpent in the garden, and these onlookers, as I will call them right here, coming to say something else than what was given, that was going to directly challenge what was told them by the Lord. So similarity is that third party, they interjected. The serpent said, did not God say you may eat of all the fruit of the trees? These people here coming directly to call his name Zechariah after his father. Now where they go different is where we see Eve losing the instruction. And another similarity you can point out is that the orders, they were given to the husband, to Adam. God, he didn't speak directly to Eve. He gave the instruction to Adam, and then the angel gave the instruction to Zechariah. He told Elizabeth. So in both cases, it was the husband that received the instruction, But then we see this third party coming to interject their will, how they think that things should go. So now here we see, difference where Eve, she completely scrapped the program and went with the third party. Her having been deceived came and she presented deception to her husband, and he agreed with the deception. So now, with Elizabeth here, we see her challenging this third party. No, not so. His name shall be called John, which made the husband's job even easier. Because now he doesn't have to go against his wife. So then is that to say that, there's no price that compares to having a good, wife by your side. You're not calling Eve a bad wife. But if she had stuck to the program, life as we know it today would be so different. There would have been no sin, no fall, no death. Who knows if, after hearing this, and then Adam and Eve sticking to God's command, if the serpent wouldn't have been dealt with once and for all, right then and there, is the question I will ask. Maybe we wouldn't even have a devil to deal with right now, because he would have been given his final judgment. You did that in the beginning. You made 1/3 of the angels fall. You try Adam and Eve, but they stood still. They stood the test. And now, for this brazen act, you had some time left, but this act is going to cost you your time that's left. And so how did we get here? If we'll back up a couple scriptures, it started out saying, and when Elizabeth's time was fully come that should she be delivered, she brought forth a son. And when her neighbors and cousins heard of the great mercy that God had shown unto her, they rejoiced with her. Now on the 8th day, when the time came to circumcise the child, they called his name Zacharias after his father. But Elizabeth said, no, not so, but his name shall be called John. And then we pick up here where they say, there's none of thy kindred that is called by that name. And then they beckon to his father, what he should be called. The father, he took the writing tablet, said his name shall be called John. Then his, tongue was loose, his mouth open, he gave God praise. So even after Elizabeth given the answer, they still did not respect her authority. They went to the husband, even more persistent than the first. So, this really, you can learn a lesson right here about, sticking to the original plan, sticking to the principles that, that founded you in the first place. Because this child, he was given with a promise that, his life is going to be, X, Y, and Z. And, specific instructions that, here is his name also. One can make a wise observation that the ways of God will always be different from the ways of the world. And the ways of God, it will be counterintuitive. It works the opposite to what you think it does. Temptation, I can envision of some people is that, they'll work hard at, showing up every day, early mornings, late nights, having such a powerful and strong vision, wanting to make a change, not being so much about fame, success, or money. And then, lo and behold, after many years of hard work, of wanting to throw in the towel, picking it back up, giving up, starting over, coming close, and then failing, everybody abandoning them. They're being called crazy for believing that they can achieve this thing. And by a stroke of destiny comes through and it works. So now they have all this success and people now know their name. So now here we have, a bunch of new people showing up that were not a part of the original idea, weren't a part of the original vision. They don't know the hard work that it took to build this. They don't know the sacrifices that were made. They don't know the close calls that happened. They don't know the reason why. Why is such a powerful thing? Why? Adam and Eve were given the why. For in the day you do, you shall die. So now these, newcomers, seeing only fame, popularity, and the wealth, they come on being so inexperienced, lacking wisdom and understanding, because the wisdom to build this thing, it came from building this thing. The wisdom to building the thing, it came from, attempting to build the thing and failing so many times. So now they show up with all their misconceptions on how they think that things should go. And what ends up happening? I can even go even further to say that the wisdom that they show up with and the ideas and the path that they try to take. See, the person who built that thing, these are some of the very things that they thought in the beginning that would work, and it did not. So now they show up essentially sending you backwards. But the person, they get seduced by the attention, and that's the thing. Because it was lonely building this thing. You have to make so many sacrifices. You have to look at other people having fun. That change that you could have used to go out, for a night in the town. You put that in the business or whatever it is that you built. So now you having, built this thing in loneliness, usually. Now all these people show up with all this attention and you get seduced by it because it's nice to belong. Because no doubt, even in your head, you think that with this success, it's going to come a lot of, people, a lot of people to support, to help you carry. But then they show up, lacking the know-how, lacking the experience. And then you end up, abandoning the very things that brought you success. Because, Elizabeth and, Zacharias, their success, it came from the promises of that this child was supposed to fulfill. His name shall be called John. He shall be great in the eyes of the Lord. He shall drink neither wine nor strong drink, and shall be filled with the Holy Ghost even from his mother's womb. And many of the children of Israel shall he turn to the Lord their God. And he shall go before the Messiah in the power and spirit of Elias, turning the hearts of the fathers to the children, and the disobedient to the wisdom of the just, to make ready a prepare for the Lord. This is why he was given. Them having not been there to hear these conditions that this child was to fulfill. So now them having no idea of the purpose. Now they come and they want to set their own course, their own destination. All right, so let's get into the scriptures. It starts out by saying, but the multitude said that there is none of thy kindred that is called by this name. So you see them trying to build this thing by how they think it should work. Because the typical model is that especially the firstborn son, he takes most after the father. He's gonna carry on the family name. He gets most of the family rank and even wealth, the inheritance. And, make no doubt, Zechariah, he is a priest, so he would still be serving the Lord, but not, according to what was promised. Sometimes you have to do something that's never been done to have something that's never been got. For him to walk in his father's footsteps, that he can only be like his father. No, Joseph, he was sold into slavery, and the Lord was with him, developing him away from his father's influence, away from his family's influence, his brother's influence, them rebuking all his dreams, trying to, kill the seed that was inside of him. So no, he's not going to take the path of Zechariah or what his name would imply. No, this child has been given a very specific purpose. And the first thing we're going to do is break out of this name, because the name, it might limit the destiny. The name might attract certain familiar spirits that limits him only to what his father was able to become. So, these people, they have some nerve, I would say that they have some nerve. Because first of all, they want to come name these people child, right? And we can understand that them naming it after the father, that would have been honorable, right? So, we do understand that. But Mary said, no, not so. His name shall be called John. Now, they have an answer to give. But there's none of your kindred that's called by this name. Are you guys setting the rules now on how things should be? Who told you we want to name him after our kindred? How are you going to get so upset when I want to name my child something? So they're not accepting what she's saying. And they're even going to go to the father, as we're going to see in a second. Remember, in the garden, the serpent, he would not accept Eve's answer. Everything she said, he came back with something else. And they say it so concerned. I can imagine the looks on their face. I can imagine the tone in their voice, trying to spark like an emotional outrage, trying to corner you into doing what they want you to do, trying to make you feel ashamed if you don't do what they want you to do. But there is none of thy kindred that is called by this name. I was so hesitant if I should say that this was definitely a spiritual influence. But, after so much kickback, it's got to be a spiritual influence. Some, spirit somewhere is trying to alter the course and destiny of this child. Because if we start out in disobedience, how is God, going to be able to walk with this child? How is he going to be able to mold and teach this child? Samuel, his mother Hannah, she made a vow to the Lord, I will give him unto you all the days of his life. The Lord, he spoke to Samuel at such a young age. He came and he called his name. Samuel thought that it was the priest that he was, under that called him. He went to him, 3 different times when God called the name. No, he called his name, 2 times, and then he went twice. But then on the 3rd time, he said, here I am, Lord. And the Lord spake to him at such a young age. The Lord, he wasn't even speaking to the priest anymore. Because, his sons, the priests, his sons were, they were laying with the woman of the temple. And God, he was warning him about it. God wasn't even speaking to this priest anymore. He was speaking to this little child. Anything the priest wanted to know, he had to ask his little child. If they had, started off such initial crucial first step in disobedience, what access would God have had to John the Baptist, to mold him, to teach him, every step of the way? Because the things that he was saying, he didn't learn that from any of the guys in the temple. Not the chief priest, not the high priest, not the Pharisees or scribes, not the Sadducees. Where did he learn these things? Same with Jesus, right? All right, so the next one says, so they made signals to his father what he would have him be called. In those days, it was really the man that had all authority. And this was a, very seriously, culturally enforced story of Esther. How did Esther become queen? When the king called, he kept a banquet and he called Vashti, who was the queen, to show off her beauty, and she would not come. He kicked her out from being queen, and then he chose a new queen, which ended up being Esther. It was the man's authority. And right now they're saying to Elizabeth that, hey, you're crazy and you don't know what you're saying. She just gave birth to this child, and they're telling her, hey, she's crazy and she doesn't know what she's saying. Hey, husband, are you going to say, anything? You have anything to say about this? And remember, he couldn't talk at the time. So they made signals on what he should be called. No, the Bible says that he was unable to speak, not that he was deaf. Why are they making signals? They're falling into his frame right now because he's unable to talk and he's using signals to communicate. Now they're communicating with him with signals. I mean, he's not deaf, right? The angel didn't say that you shall be deaf, but you shall be dumb, unable to speak. So they made signals. What must be going through Elizabeth's mind right now, looking at these people, coming to take over her house. We have a bunch of bandwagonists, we have an angry mob, running through town right here. Only thing they need now is like the pitchfork and the torches. Like, how dare you name him, John, and not Zacharias after his dad? Angry mob rolling through and they're steaming down everyone. So, like I said, the father, he has, the ultimate final choice in what this child is going to be named. And if they think that some error was being made, surely his, word would set everything straight. They're behaving like that child who, they'll go and ask the mom for something and she say no. And then they go right to the father afterwards and then he might say yes. So then now, the mom goes to when the mom now sees the child with this thing that she told them no, did I not tell you no? But yeah, I asked dad, he told me yes, so I got it. So upon not getting the answer they were looking for, they made several attempts to, redirect. This just goes to show you, that, a person can be wrong, but yet still be so convincing, can be setting you on a contrary course, have all the good reasons in the world. If you were given specific instructions, from God about a certain thing, you hold true to that. I told the story yesterday about the prophet who was told to deliver a message and then he was to leave. Now, he was not allowed to speak to anyone else. He wasn't allowed to eat or to stop. He wasn't even allowed to return the same way he entered. And, somebody tracked him down and lied to him and brought him home and made him eat. He lost his life, over that. All right, so the next one says, so the father, he called for a writing table and he wrote, his name is John, and they all marveled. So no doubt he's still unable to speak. So, he must have made the writing signal, like this. So they brought him the writing tablet. So now him having been unable to speak since, before conception, because, he was in the temple serving, it said that, after his week was finished, that he went to his own home and his wife Elizabeth conceived and hid herself 5 months. So, he was, one can ask this question. So he was unable to speak since, seeing the angel in the temple. So then this whole time when he was, with his wife, so he was still unable to speak. So, knowing this, that he did not use words to communicate this vision onto her. He had to have written it down. I can ask the question, how much of it did he actually reveal, onto her? We know that he told her the name because here she is, saying his name shall be John. So then, one can ask the question, he couldn't speak and that's the only way he could communicate. Why did he have to call for the writing tablet? Why was the writing tablet not already in his hands? I guess he was, either observing the birth. No, it was the 8th day when they came to circumcise the child. How comes he didn't have this writing tablet in his hands, ready to go? He had to call for it. So them signaling to the father what it should be called. He called for the writing tablet. I said his name shall be called John. So, thinking through the instructions that were given, no doubt his wife already telling them the name gave him, less resistance to deal with because, they were united. He didn't have to convince them of anything. Seeing both of them stand together, he didn't have to give him a reason because they were already saying there's none of thy kindred called by this name. He didn't have to give them a reason, where the name came from, what purpose the name served. Because he obviously did not tell them, all these things. Because if he did, tell them all these things that the angel said and they are still here doing this, then, just pay attention to something like that. Because, who knows what they're going to come with next in the future. So he wrote, his name shall be called John. I think in that language, it's like Yah. I know in the Middle Eastern languages, Yah is usually John. It is, and that will be close to Yahweh, who is to prepare the way for Yahweh. So when he wrote, his name shall be John. One can ask the question, if, Elizabeth had somehow fallen like, Eve in the garden, would, Zechariah still have gone through with the name he was supposed to, John, or would he have fallen also? So when he wrote, his name is John, the people marveled. So here they are scratching their heads, over something that they have, no inkling, no clue about the purpose, where it came from, what it means, what it's supposed to accomplish. If you notice, it's the strong people in life that are able to disagree with others and be comfortable disagreeing with them when they know something being mentioned that does not serve them. All right, so the next one says, and immediately his mouth was open and his tongue loosed, and he spake, praising God. So here we see the promise of the angel when he said, "Behold, thou shalt be dumb and not able to speak, until the day that these things shall be accomplished." All things accomplished, not only the birth, because this is the 8th day that this child, has been birthed. So it's not just the birth, the name. The name is the final thing that loosed his tongue. One other promise, he shall be filled with the Holy Ghost even from his mother's womb. We saw when Mary saluted Elizabeth, the babe leapt, and Elizabeth was filled with the Holy Ghost. The babe leapt in the womb. If it was just only his birth, then Zechariah's tongue would have been loosed the first day that this child was born. But now, having settled on the name John, permanent, and standing firm in front of all these people wanting to change the course of what we were working with. So then, if he had named him something else, would his tongue have been closed forever? So immediately his mouth was open and his tongue loosed. We see the same thing happening with Apostle Paul when he was Saul persecuting Christians, but his eyes, were closed. When they prayed for him, it said that scales, fell from his eyes. So, one can ask the question, his mouth was open, was it literally sealed? If you see in the Matrix, the first one, when they put, that scorpion-looking metal thing that was supposed to track Neo when they came and took him in the beginning of the movie, and he tried to scream and his mouth just disappeared, was there a physical closing of the mouth? Because it said his mouth was open and his tongue loose. Or is it just, metaphorical? Even something in the spirit, like his mouth had been closed in the spirit, but then it was open in the spirit and his tongue loose, and he, spake, praising God. Fear fell on all them that dwelt round about, and the noise of the matter was voiced, throughout all the hill country of Judea. So now here's a real, miracle being witnessed, and, on many different levels. So, people there talking, because, he was unable to speak since, before they even, conceived this child. And now his mouth gets opened right when they name the child. So know that this is, this is something that's not by accident. This is something that has a deeper meaning. Signs and wonders are being shown here. That there's something more powerful, governing all these things. And that we are at the mercy of its power, which is ultimately God himself. But this shows, power and purpose, because, them, giving the child the promised name. We see him, able to speak. So for 9 months, he was not able to speak. And to see, these two events connected, that's reason to give faith. That's reason for people to believe. So then it was noised throughout, all the hill country of Judea. We know that when Mary was told that she went to see Elizabeth, it was told that she went into the hill country in the region of Judea. So, people, they're talking about this. People have children every day. They deliver, they name them. There's not really a reason to talk about a child, on this level, where it would be told throughout the whole region. People have children, the neighbors know, family members know. There might be a little showing, but it's not given this much attention. So, because of the way how everything worked out, them being barren, being so old, stricken in age, them having tried for so many years, and now him being unable to speak. So now, at this point, these people, they do not know that he is, Elias, that's to go before him, to prepare the way. They don't know the doctrine that he will teach, the respect that he will have. But, just the signs and wonders that was, demonstrated around the time of his birth. And, remember, we didn't really see many miracles being done after they came out of captivity in Babylon. The last, miracles we really saw were at the time of the kings, right after like David and Solomon, Hezekiah. He prayed to the wall. God gave him 15 more years to his life. In Babylon, we saw Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the fiery furnace. Daniel in the lion's den. After that, we didn't really see many miracles. So here we have a rebirth of miracles. So, people, it's exciting. And, God, he's on his way. I'm Straw Greenhorn.